Mother looked me in the eye across the dinner table and said, "The best thing you could do for your brother's engagement party is simply not show up." She said it the way you'd tell someone the weather. Casual. Like she was commenting on traffic. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth and I just stopped. My brother didn't look up from his phone. My father studied the centerpiece like it had suddenly become the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. And my mother picked up her wineglass and took a sip, completely unbothered, like she hadn't just told her own daughter that her absence was a gift. I was 28 years old. I had moved back to Elmwood, Ohio 11 months earlier to help keep our family's catering business from going under. I had left a salaried position at a hospitality management company in Columbus to do it. I had walked away from my apartment, my routine, a relationship that probably could have gone somewhere if I'd given it the time. All of it, I packed into my car and drove home because my father called me on a Tuesday night and said they were 3 months behind on the commercial kitchen lease, and the business my grandmother had started 40 years ago was about to disappear. I said yes without even sleeping on it. That was the kind of daughter I was. My brother, he's 4 years older than me, had built himself what looked like a very impressive life. He had a real estate license, a client list he loved to name drop, and a fiancée named from a wealthy family in Westerville whose father owned 3 car dealerships. He drove a car that cost more than I made in a year. He wore a watch he made sure you noticed. When our parents called him about the business, he sent a check for $2,000 and said he was slammed with closings. $2,000. The overdue lease alone was $11,000. So I came home. I renegotiated the lease. I restructured the vendor contracts. I fired the bookkeeper who had been quietly mismanaging the accounts for 2 years and did the books myself on weekend nights after the rest of the staff went home. I hired 2 new part-time event coordinators and trained them from scratch. Within 7 months, we had gone from 3 booked events per month to 11. We were profitable again. My parents told everyone at church that the business had turned itself around. They never once said my name in those conversations. I know, because Mrs. My name in those conversations. Henley from the choir told me so, kind of embarrassed, like she was apologizing for them. I told myself it was fine. I told myself that's just how they were. They weren't demonstrative people. They weren't the type to spotlight someone else's effort even when that someone was their own kid. I told myself I wasn't doing it for the credit anyway, and mostly I believed that. The engagement party planning started in January. My brother's fiancée, her family had a very specific vision. Seated dinner for 90 guests, a florist from Dublin, Ohio, her mother had used for years, a string quartet for cocktail hour, a photo booth with custom props, a dessert table instead of a traditional cake because her cousin had done something similar and it had looked beautiful in pictures. My mother called me the morning after the engagement announcement and said, "You'll handle the coordination, won't you, since you're already running things?" She didn't ask. She confirmed. I said, "What's the budget?" There was a pause. "We were thinking you could work with what we have." "What do we have?" "Well, you know the business better than anyone now." I understood in that moment what was happening. They wanted me to fund the event through the business, to pull resources, vendor relationships, staffing, the commercial kitchen we used for our own catering jobs, and redirect them toward a private family party without actually paying for any of it. Not a loan, not a plan to reimburse, just an assumption that I would make it happen and absorb the cost into the business I had spent nearly a year rebuilding. I should have said no that morning. I know that now. My friend Jolene. She'd been telling me for months to stop volunteering myself as the family's solution to every problem. She would have said something sharp and true. Like, "You know they're just going to do this again, right?" But I said I'd see what I could do. What I could do turned out to be quite a lot, because I was very good at my job. Over the next 6 weeks, I coordinated everything. The florist. The venue rental at the Elmwood Grange Hall, which I negotiated down by 12% by agreeing to feature them in our catering portfolio. The string quartet. A music education professor at Ohio State who ran a small ensemble on weekends, very reasonable rate, genuinely talented. The custom dessert table, which I designed myself using our own pastry staff. The photo booth, the linens, the lighting. I was project managing a 90-person event from scratch, on top of running the day-to-day operations of the business, for free because I was family. My brother came into the kitchen one afternoon while I was going over the vendor invoices, and he leaned against the counter and said, "Make sure the bar is fully stocked. Her family drinks good bourbon." I looked up from the spreadsheet. "Also," he said, "I'm thinking we should add a slideshow. Can you put something together? Just like 30 photos, music underneath. You know how to do that stuff." "Sure," I said. "I'll add it to the list." He nodded and left. He didn't say thank you. He didn't ask how I was managing. He just walked back out the same way he came in. I sat there for a minute looking at the door. Then I went back to the spreadsheet. The dinner where it fell apart was the last Friday in February. My mother had made pot roast, which is what she makes when she wants the evening to feel warm and normal. We sat down and got through about 10 minutes of small talk before my brother said, casually, like he was bringing up weekend plans, "Hey, so about the party. Her parents are going to want us to do a formal toast, so we need it to feel really polished. Can we get a professional MC?" "An MC. For a family engagement party." I said, "That's going to cost extra. We're already at the ceiling." He looked at my mother. My mother looked at me. "Can't you find someone?" she said. "You know so many vendors now. Finding someone isn't the issue. Paying someone is the issue." "Well," my father said, still not meeting my eyes, "I'm sure you can work something out." I put my fork down. Not dramatically. Just put it down. "I want to be clear about something," I said. "I've been coordinating this entire event. The florist, the venue, the quartet, the dessert table, all of it. I've also been doing this on top of running the business. I'm not complaining about that. But I want to know who is actually paying for this party. Because right now it looks like the answer is the business, which means it's coming out of the margin I spent 10 months rebuilding." The table got very quiet. My mother said, "We're all family. It comes out of the family. The business isn't a family fund. It's a business," my brother said. "You're making this into a bigger thing than it needs to be. I'm asking a basic question about where the money is coming from." "Her family is contributing," he said. "They're paying for the bourbon and the flowers. The florist was $3,000. The bourbon he'd specified was about $400, all in." I did the math in about 3 seconds. "So we're absorbing the rest," I said. Nobody answered me. That was when my mother said it. She took a breath, almost like she was steadying herself, and she said, "You know what would make this easier for everyone if you weren't at the party? Her family is very social. They're going to have people there from their circle. And frankly, you make things complicated." I stared at her. "You have a way of making things about logistics," she said, "about money. And I just think for one evening, we don't need that energy. I make things about logistics. I make things about logistics. I make things about money." I had spent 11 months making sure there was a business left for them to stand behind. I had made things about numbers every single day so that my father didn't have to have a conversation with his landlord about vacating the commercial kitchen he'd worked out of for 22 years. I had made things about logistics so my mother could still call herself a business owner at the ladies' auxiliary luncheon. And she was asking me not to come to the party. I picked my fork back up. I finished eating. I said goodnight and I drove back to the apartment above the garage that I'd been living in since I moved home. And I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time without turning the lights on. Then I called Jolene. She answered on the second ring. I told her what happened. I got through the whole thing without crying, which surprised me a little. When I finished, Jolene was quiet for just a second, and then she said, "So what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to give them exactly what they asked for. Here is what I did not do. I did not make a scene. I did not send an angry text. I did not call my brother and tell him what I thought of him, which I had a lot of thoughts about. What I did was go into the office on Saturday morning and spend 4 hours on the phone and email. I called the florist first. Very politely, I explained that we needed to cancel the order for the engagement party due to a change in plans. There was a cancellation fee, which I noted on the invoice and forwarded to my brother's personal email with a brief explanation. Cancellation fee, florist, per scope change. Please process payment directly. Then I called the venue coordinator at the Grange Hall and told her that the rental for March 14th would need to be released. She was lovely about it. She said she'd already had another inquiry for that date anyway. The string quartet was a little harder because I felt genuinely bad. The professor had turned down another booking for us. I called him directly, explained there had been a family situation, and asked if he'd be willing to book one of our corporate events at his regular rate as a goodwill gesture. He said yes, and I meant it when I said I was sorry. The pastry staff I managed easily. They were ours. They'd just returned to the regular schedule. By Saturday afternoon, the engagement party that had been 43 days in the making was, logistically speaking, gone. I sent my brother one message. Not mean. Not long. I've released the vendors for March 14th. Since you asked me not to be there, I thought it made sense for me not to be involved. I forwarded the cancellation notices to you. The venue is available to rebook directly through the Grange Hall. Ask for Cheryl, she's very helpful. Then I closed my laptop. The call started Sunday morning. My mother first, then my father, then my brother, then my mother again. I let them go to voicemail. I sat at my kitchen table with coffee and I listened to the sound of my phone buzzing against the wood, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 11 months. Quiet. Not the quiet of being alone or being sad. The quiet of having put something down that I'd been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. My brother's voicemail was the most instructive. He started with angry. "What is wrong with you? Do you know what you've done?" And moved through confused. "I don't understand why you're doing this," and ended somewhere near pleading. "Her parents are going to think we're a disaster. Just please call me back." Her parents. Not our parents. Her parents' opinion. That was what mattered. I called him back on Sunday evening. He picked up immediately. "Are you going to fix this?" he said. "No," I said. "I'm not. You're ruining our engagement party. You released me from the responsibility. I took you at your word. That is not." He stopped. "Mom said you shouldn't come. That doesn't mean cancel everything. She said I make things complicated. She said I make things about logistics and money. So I simplified things. Now it's not about logistics and money anymore. It's just about you and your fiancé planning your own party." He was quiet for a moment. "This is so selfish," he said. "Yeah," I said. "It might be. I think I'm going to try it for a while and see how it feels." I said goodnight and I hung up. I want to be clear about one thing, because I've thought about it a lot since. My brother and his fiancée did end up having an engagement party. Her parents, once they understood what happened, stepped in and planned something at their country club in Westerville. Smaller, more elegant. Honestly, probably nicer than what I'd been building. They covered the full cost themselves without a single conversation about who was absorbing what. Apparently, that's what people do when they care about something. My mother called me the following week and said very stiffly that things had worked out fine. She did not apologize. She did not acknowledge what she'd said at that dinner table. What she said was, "I hope you're not planning to hold this over us. Hold it over them." I told her I wasn't planning to hold anything. I was just making some changes. The change I was making was this. I had already sent my resume to 2 hospitality groups in Nashville, Tennessee, where a former colleague had relocated and kept telling me I'd love it there. I had a phone screen on Tuesday. By the following Friday, I had a formal interview scheduled. In the meantime, I trained my replacement at the family business. I spent 3 weeks doing it methodically and well, because the business hadn't done anything to me. It was just a business, and the 2 part-time coordinators I'd hired deserved to have a solid foundation under them. I documented everything. I left organized files. I updated the vendor contact list and the booking system and wrote a transition manual that was 22 pages long. That's who I am. I'm thorough, even when I'm leaving. My father came into the office on my last day and stood in the doorway for a while without saying much. Eventually he said, "You didn't have to go this far." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to." He nodded slowly. He looked tired. He looked for a moment like he was going to say something else, something that mattered. And then he just said, "Drive safe," and walked back down the hall. I sat in that office for another minute. The space smelled like coffee and the old wood of the cabinets my grandmother had installed when she first opened the place. I'd spent a lot of late nights in that room. I'd solved a lot of problems in there alone. I turned off the light and I locked the door and I put the key on the front counter. Nashville in April is something. The dogwoods were still blooming when I drove in. I had a sublet in East Nashville for the first 3 months, a second-floor apartment in a house owned by a retired schoolteacher who grew tomatoes in the backyard and always had Dolly Parton playing softly somewhere. I started my new position as an events coordinator with a regional hospitality group the second week of the month. The first morning, I drove to the office with the windows down and the radio on, and I thought, when did I forget that this is what working is supposed to feel like? Jolene came to visit in June, and we sat on the apartment porch in the evenings and talked for hours the way we used to before I lost a year of my life trying to earn something I was never going to get. "You seem like yourself again," she said one night. I told her I thought that was probably the nicest thing anyone had said to me in a long time. My mother sends texts occasionally. Short ones. Updates about the business. About my brother's wedding planning. They've set a date, a venue in Columbus. Her family is handling most of it. I respond when I feel like it. Sometimes I don't respond for a few days, and when I do, I keep it brief. She hasn't said what she said at that dinner table again, but she hasn't said she shouldn't have said it either. Some things I've learned don't get resolved, they just become part of the record. Part of the understanding you carry with you about who certain people are and what they're capable of. That's not bitterness. I want to be careful here because bitterness is heavy and I'm done carrying heavy things for other people. It's just clarity. I know what I did for that family. I know exactly what it cost me, and what it was worth and what I got in return. That knowledge is mine, and nobody can negotiate it away from me or fold it into the general expenses or forget to mention it at church. I know. And I get to decide what I do with that. In Nashville, I have a life that belongs to me. A job I'm good at, that I chose, that pays me what I'm worth. A Sunday morning routine that involves a farmer's market and a very good cup of coffee from a place 2 blocks away where they know my order. A circle of people who ask how I'm doing and actually wait for the answer. I'm building something here. Not for anyone else's benefit, not to prove anything to anyone who already decided who I was before I walked in the room, just for me. And the door to that chapter closed behind me like a full stop at the end of a sentence I'd been trying to finish for a very long time. Clean. Final. Mine. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the dinner. Not my mother's voice or the way my father looked at the centerpiece instead of me. The moment I keep returning to is smaller than all of that. It's me sitting on the edge of my bed in the dark, still in my coat, not crying, just breathing. And thinking, how long have I been doing this? I spent 11 months rebuilding something that wasn't broken because of me. I restructured, renegotiated, retrained. I absorbed every problem quietly because that felt like the right thing to do. Not just practical, but morally correct. You show up for family. You don't keep score. You do what needs doing and you trust that the people around you are paying attention, even when they say nothing. That's not weakness. I want to be careful about that. The impulse to help, to stay, to put in the work without requiring a standing ovation. That's actually something worth keeping. What I had to learn was the difference between giving from a place of genuine care and giving from a place of fear. Fear that if I stopped, they wouldn't love me. Fear that my value in that family was conditional on my usefulness. When my mother told me not to come to the party, she accidentally handed me the clearest information I'd ever received. She told me, without meaning to, exactly what the arrangement had always been, and something in me that had been confused for a long time just got quiet and clear. What I did next wasn't revenge. I've thought about that word and it doesn't fit. Revenge implies you're still emotionally attached to the outcome, still hoping the other person suffers the right amount, still waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for anything. I canceled the vendors because I had agreed to coordinate an event I was no longer welcome at, and continuing didn't make sense. That's not drama, that's just logic, with some self-respect behind it. Here's what I think about the whole year now, with some distance between me and it. You can be a genuinely good person and still be wrong about where you're putting your energy. Intelligence isn't only about solving problems, it's about knowing which problems are actually yours to solve. I was very smart about the business and very slow to understand that the real problem, the one underneath everything, wasn't the lease or the vendor contracts or the bookkeeping. It was that I kept walking into a room where the terms of belonging had never been honest, and trying harder every time the door didn't open. And perseverance, I used to think that meant staying. Now, I think it means continuing to move. Even when the thing you're moving away from is something you loved or wanted to love, or tried very hard to make into something it was never going to be. In Nashville, I have a Sunday morning. I have a farmer's market, and a coffee order, and a porch where Jolene sat with me in June and said I seemed like myself again. I have work that asks something real of me and pays me accordingly. I have a life that doesn't require me to make myself smaller to fit inside it. That's what I was actually building toward all along. I just took the long way there.